everyone. Welcome to Creature Feature. I'm Erin Benavides.
And I'm Alan Ivory.
And Alan, we have a fantastic guest today, don't we?
Yes, we do. You might have seen her in the past.
Yeah, so we'll get to our special guest soon, but Alan, I think we have some shout outs to give.
I do.
So let me share my screen here.
The first shout out we have is to Miss Smith's class at Maplewood, and I could see some of her students were talking about that bird-eating tarantula. Can't not talk about that. And then we also have Miss Johnson Allen's class. You talked about all the hairs that are on these tarantulas, how big they can get, and they also talked about that bird-eating tarantula as well.
All right. And so this week we have an animal that my guess is you've never heard of before. We are going to be talking about a Tenrec, and the handout looks a little bit like this. And so during today's presentation, I want you to think about where a Tenrec might live and what they might need to stay alive. And then you'll illustrate, and teachers, please send us your student work. We love to see those examples, and we love to give your students a shout out. And then on the back of the handout, there are some optional writing prompts, and you could share those with us as well. All right, Alan, I think we're going to get started with our story.
Before you start reading your story, if you don't mind switching the slides, we're seeing the others.
Okay, let me stop screen sharing and let me re-screen share. Thank you, Alan, for pointing that out. How's that look? Better?
Much, much better.
All right, let's go with that. Today's book is Tenryx Twigs by Bert Kitchen. As the sun rose over the hill, Tenrec popped his head out of his burrow and sniffed the fresh morning air. The weather was dry and bright, just right for building. He snuffled along until he came to the place where he had gathered a pile of twigs the day before. He walked around the twigs several times, humming happily. Then he began to build. He pushed thick twigs into the ground in a circle and rested more twigs on these. Then he chose twigs that seemed springy and bendy and wove them in and out, stepping back from time to time to see how the shape was coming along. Then old Warthog came by. He could be grumpy at the best of times, but today he was feeling particularly miserable. He plonked his hoof right on the side of Tenric's twig building. "Useless, a waste of time," he grumbled. "Ask any of the other animals." And he went on his way. Tenrec was upset. Useless, he thought. A waste of time? He decided he would ask some of the other animals. Tenrec spied Gray Parrot on a branch above him. Before he could even ask the question, Gray Parrot squawked, "Useless, useless, a waste of time." "I haven't even asked you the question," Tenrec said. Then he realized that Gray Parrot had overheard old Warthog. He was just simply repeating what he had heard. "I'll ask someone else," Tenrec said to himself. Soon he came across Giant Anteater. He asked him what he thought of his twigs. "Strange as it seems," said Anteater. "Although I do have a long nose, I don't really like poking it into other creatures' business, so I wouldn't like to say. But I have just seen Pangolin hanging about. Why not ask him?" Tenrec found Pangolin hanging by his tail from a high branch. To get closer, Tenrec quickly made a small twig platform and asked him his question. But Pangolin was so wrapped up in himself and his own thoughts, he could not even be bothered to try and understand. "Twigs, buildings, Tenrec? He said in an absent-minded voice. Tenrec was feeling no happier. Then he spotted Giraffe munching leaves way up in the tree above him. It seemed as though Giraffe's head were in the clouds. Tenrec tapped him on the hoof to get his attention. Giraffe, I don't know if you've noticed my little twig buildings, Tenrec asked politely, but do you think I should stop building them? Giraffe bent down. I've never noticed your twigs, Tenrec, so I have no feelings for or against them. With that, he straightened up and his head disappeared into the leaves again. Just then, Tenrec saw Golden Mole shuffling along looking for food. Surely he will see things my way, thought Tenrec. So he said to Mole, do you think I'm foolish to make my twig buildings? Oh, I spend most of my time underground in the dark, Tenrec. I can see little or nothing out here. I'm afraid I know nothing about your buildings. Just as Mole finished speaking, a Judent stork came strutting along. Tenrec put his question to the tall bird. A Judent stork puffed out his chest, looking very important. Well, he said, in my opinion, as a matter of fact, perhaps. But overcome by his own importance, he completely forgot the question and began to strut away. Tenrec was beginning to lose heart when he came upon Two-Toed Sloth hanging sleepily from the bough of a tree. Sloth, he said, do you think I should stop building my twigs? Warthog says there's no use for them. Now Sloth was extremely slow. Finally, he said, oh, ask me again tomorrow, Tenrec. Or better still, next week. Oh, such a difficult question. Oh, that I need plenty of time. Oh, in order to... Before Sloth could finish the sentence, he'd fallen asleep. Who else could Tenrec ask? Did nobody care about his twigs? Then Tenrec remembered Milky Eagle Owl. He made his way to Owl's perching place, where he knew the bird spent many hours just sitting and thinking. Please, Owl, he asked, do you think my twig building is useless and a waste of time? Owl closed his eyes for several seconds and then said, I find your twig building very interesting, Tenrec. You seem very happy when you're building, and you certainly do not bother me, or anyone else. In fact, you may inspire others to build. My advice is to continue building. Now Tenrec had his answer. Humming happily, he went back to his building and pushed another twig into the ground. And in this book, we were introduced to a whole bunch of unique animals from unique places. But of course, this book was fictional. So we would like to learn more about the real Tenryx. And let me stop screen sharing. Alan, could you introduce our guest?
So this week, our guest is Miss Amy Pritchard with Ambassadors of Nature, and she might have a Tenrec to share with us today.
Yeah, but first, did you see all the kind of spikes on the back of that Tenrec? Now, can you think of another animal that has spikes or quills? If you said porcupine, you are right. And I want to share my screen with you for just a second and show you something really cool. So this is an African crested porcupine, and they are the largest species of porcupine. They live in Africa with all those other animals, and they have really, really large quills. Do you see all those quills in that leopard? So I have some really cool African crested porcupine quills. And you can see they come in all different shapes and sizes, and they are really, really sharp. But this one is really cool. Can you see? It's not very sharp at all, and it's really bendy. And this is what's called a sensory quill. So that way, no leopard or anything else is going to sneak up behind that porcupine because it stands out higher than all the other quills. If something were to get too close, would that porcupine shoot those quills out? No, porcupines don't shoot their quills. They actually run backwards as fast as they can until they feel that they've hit the animal, and then they run away to safety. And here in North America, our porcupine quills are not this big. They are a little bit smaller, and I have a quill to show you from a North American porcupine because it's always fun to see quills from different animals. So here's a really long one. So this is one of those sensory quills. And then in my jar of goodies, I've got another one. There's another one. That's a little bit smaller. Can you see those quills? So these are from a North American porcupine that we don't have here in Florida, but we have all over North America. And now I want to talk to you guys about the Tenrec. So what we saw, do you remember Miss Erin said that that was fiction? And so they took a lot of liberties. And so it was a little bit different than what you're really going to see if you go out to Africa, because the Tenryx, actually that lowland streaked Tenrec that we saw, looks a little different. So I'm going to show you a picture of what they really look like. So this is what that Tenrec looks like in real life. Can you see that bright yellow? It's a little bit brighter in real life than in the book. And look at all of those quills. Look at all of those spiky quills. The book didn't quite show that they were so spiky. But all those quills are very important. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why with my Tenrec that I have. And I also, while I get Mabel, I also want you to think about where Tenryx live. So we listened to the story and we saw all the animals. So I want you to think for a second and think, where do Tenryx live? Did anybody say that Tenryx live in Africa? Because we saw pangolin and we saw giraffe and we saw a couple other animals that are from Africa. And so, yeah, Tenryx live in Africa. But here's a trick. They don't live on the Africa that we think they live on. They live, let me scoot up a little bit more. They live on the island of Madagascar. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie Madagascar. Oh, a lot of hands go up. So remember all the lemurs of Madagascar? And you remember how the lion and the zebra and everybody were trying to make it back to Africa, and they accidentally landed on Madagascar. And that's because it's an island right next to Africa. And Tenryx only live on that island next to Madagascar, or next to Africa, but it is part of Africa. So my Tenrec looks a little bit different from the lowland streak Tenrec that we saw in the story and saw a picture of, because my Tenrec is a different species of Tenrec. That means she is a Tenrec, but she is a little different, just like different dog breeds. So she is a different species, even though she is a Tenrec. Her name is Mabel, and Mabel is a lesser hedgehog Tenrec. Now, this name is kind of confusing because their name has the word hedgehog in it, and they're not a hedgehog at all. They're a Tenrec. But they get their name, the lesser hedgehog Tenrec, because they look very similar to a hedgehog. Now, hedgehogs are a little bit darker in color, and they have these really cool bands, kind of like glasses or kind of like raccoons that go right across their eyes. They have a much darker face, where Mabel, you can see, has a very, very light face. Now, she has all of these quills. And what do you think that Tenryx and Mabel might use these quills for? Think about it for a second. Why would they need all these quills? Well, for protection. So these quills are pretty spiny. And just like porcupines, like we saw before, these guys can give themselves the goosebumps. We get the goosebumps when we're cold, but they can just say, oh no, there's a predator nearby. I need to get the goosebumps because I need all my quills to stand straight up. So they have the ability to get the goosebumps on command. Isn't that so cool? It's a great way to protect themselves. Now, she is nocturnal. That means that she's awake during the night, but she is sleeping mostly during the day. So she was taking a little cat nap when we woke her up for this program, but she doesn't seem to mind too much. She likes hanging out and seeing you guys. And she is also an insectivore. Take a minute and think about that word, insectivore. So we know that carnivores eat meat and herbivores eat plants and omnivores eat plants and meat. What do you think an insectivore eats? Did you guys say insects? If you guys said insects, you are right. She eats insects. So she has a very special diet of a little bitty kibble, just tiny enough for her little bitty mouth. And it's made specially for insectivore eaters. And she also gets real live insects as well that she loves to munch on. So she likes things like worms, mealworms or superworms. And she also likes things like crickets and even cockroaches. Raise your hand if you like cockroaches. Oh, I'm not seeing a lot of hands go up for that one. You guys don't like eating cockroaches? Come on. That's one of Mabel's favorite things. So these guys, they really have to be able to protect themselves with all these spikes because, as you can see, she's really little and she's not going to get any bigger than what she is right now. And if she were to be very nervous about us being here or be scared for any reason, she would give herself the goosebumps and curl into that ball, but she's not doing that. But she also has this really soft tummy. And so she has to curl up into a ball to protect herself from any predators. And she does a really good job because she's got all these spikes. And she also furrows her brow. Do you know what that means? It means she goes, that's pretty much what it means. And because see, all this face is unprotected. It has no spikies on it. So what she does is she goes, and that brings all the spikes from her forehead all the way down and covers up her face. Now, I think, Mr. Allen, is it time for questions?
Yes, it is. So if my
Perfect.
teachers would like to take a minute or so to come up with some questions with their class and write them in chat, and I will ask Miss Amy.
And in the meantime, we'll just look at how cute little Miss Mabel is. Look at that little nose. So you can see in the book, she's a little bit different from that lowland street Tenrec that we saw that had a much longer nose. Mabel looks like she's waking up and getting just a little restless. So I'm going to put her back while we're waiting on all those questions. Let her get comfortable again.
Our first question is going to be from Miss Johnson Allen's class. And how old is Mabel?
I don't know, actually. That is a very good question. But Mabel was donated to us from a conservancy up in High Springs, and she was just kind of dropped there. And they mainly do reptiles, and so they gave her to me to use for education. So we don't exactly know how old she is.
Now, will she get any bigger?
No, she is full grown. We know that much. She's a full grown adult female.
Interesting. Now, Miss Golden's class would like to know, why don't they throw their quills, and why are their quills so small?
So on Mabel, she's a very small animal. So if we had quills like this on her, that would be a lot of extra weight that she would have to carry around. Even though these quills are kind of light, a lot of quills are going to add up and they're going to weigh her down. And why don't they throw their quills? Nobody can throw their quills. Their quills are made out of the same thing that our hair is made out of. Now, Halloween is right around the corner, and it would be so cool if I could shoot my hair out. That would be so cool. Unfortunately, I can't do that. And just like I can't do that, they can't shoot their quills. Although that would be pretty scary. So I'm pretty happy that they can't shoot their quills.
I'm right there with you. Miss Golden's class also had the question of, why are Hedgehog and Tenryx the same name, but not the same?
So they got their name, lesser hedgehog Tenrec. Mabel's species name is a lesser hedgehog Tenrec, but she only has the word hedgehog in the name because scientists said they look like a hedgehog. So we're going to put that in the name to let everybody know what they look like. They're lesser, so they're smaller. Hedgehog, because they look like a hedgehog, and then Tenrec at the end, because that is their true species.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. Now, we get this question every week. You probably know it's coming. Miss Johnson Allen's class would like to know, is Mabel fun as a pet? Is this a normal pet that anyone else can have?
So this is not a super fun pet. They are nocturnal. And so she's right back to sleep. I can't even see her. She is in her home. She was very slow when she was out here. She wasn't very active. So you're not going to be able to be as active with them as like a dog or a cat because they have a different sleeping schedule than us. They're also really spiky. So it's not an animal that you're going to be able to really snuggle and be cute with, because it does actually hurt. Like, even though I was holding her, all of those spikes prick, even though she didn't have goosebumps, she wasn't trying to hurt me. They do irritate my hands just a little bit. So sometimes I wear gloves, but today I decided not to.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Miss Golden's class would like to know, how old can they get up to?
So they can get up to 10 to 15 years. So I'm hoping Mabel is very, very young, although I do know that the Ashton Biological Preserve, where I got her from, had her for 2 years prior.
Okay.
So she still's probably pretty young.
Okay. Miss Johnson Allen's class would also like to know, does she bite? Would she bite you? And then a little side question also is, like, how do they move around? Are they diggers, or are they more jumpers? How do they move around?
No, they are so cool. So I'll answer the last question first. How do they move around? Well, hedgehogs, which are closely related, are terrestrial. Terrestrial means that they stay on the forest floor, on the ground. Tenryx are terrestrial and arboreal, which means that they do climb up in the trees too, which makes them super, super cool. The other question is, do they bite? Can they bite? Absolutely. Anything with a mouth has the ability to bite you. So it's all about, for me, it's all about knowing my animals and reading their body language and making sure that they're not showing me any signs that they were stressed out. Did you see when she started wiggling around a little bit more? I knew she was a little uncomfortable and she was ready to go back in her home, to go back to bed. So I didn't keep her out any longer. I put her straight back to bed because I knew that that's what she wanted.
Well, I didn't realize how late it's already getting. I had so many more questions I wanted to ask you, but it's already 8:30. And so I'd like to thank all my teachers for joining us today. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I'd like to thank Amy for sharing her animals with us once again. And so, Erin, do you want to send us away?
I think you've said it all. All right, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.